Hit record. Before we get started, are there any questions? Jenna, you're right. It is a good workout, the restraint and exclusion, or the safe crisis management. The good news is you never have to do that much at one time in a real situation. So that is the practice is worse than the actual thing. All right. I have gone through all of the ecological inventories that were finished. Yes. So Wendy asked, can we make changes and resubmit if we like? Yes. So I have graded all of them that were turned in up until, a little bit ago. If you
But
need to change it, you can. Yes. I'm sorry. I thought somebody was asking a question. Okay. Um, some of you turned in just um one of the task analyses. So if you would like to resubmit or just attach the second one on, I'll try to make a sweep and go through them again next week and add those back in just so that you have a chance to do that. Um, I understand sometimes wires get crossed on that. Um, I haven't had a chance to look at the IEPs. I'm going to try to get those ASAP. I've been kind of slacking on grading the last couple of weeks. It's just you guys know this time of the year is tough because you're getting back into the swing of things, but I will get them back to you as soon as I can. Typically with the IEPs, I try to give you a lot of feedback just because this is such a huge part of your job. So, when you're looking at feedback, don't look at it as something that you've done wrong, but just as a way for me to try to help you get through that. They are due. I was just looking at the due date. Um, that might be another thing, September 13th. I had dates somewhere. Where are they? Up here. Yes, you are correct. September 13th. See, I'm not slacking that bad. I thought I looked at them and they were due on the 10th. Well, whew, I'm not slacking. Okay, I will try to get through those tonight so that, or not tonight, this week, so that I can give you plenty of feedback on those. The next assignment, I'll go over that now rather than later, is your gathering information assignment. I'll go ahead and um, I'll open that up. That is not due until the 20th. So you have a little bit of time on that. Um, so basically, what you're going to be doing for this assignment, you will have, there are three strategies for assessing students for MSD. Um, and plan it's kind of an assessment slash planning systems that we use. One is personal futures planning. That is kind of when we look at where we want our students to be, and we make plans kind of backwards chaining. There's the McGill Action Planning System that's called MAPS. Right now, I know in Kentucky, MAPS is another type of assessment. That's not what you're going to be looking into. MAPS is kind of a gen ed assessment. This is something else. So make sure you're looking at the book for MAPS. And then the coach, which is choosing options and accommodations for children. I will say that elementary, middle, even high for MSD, we use the coach a lot when they're doing like a reeval for a student. So that's a good one to look at. But person center planning or personal future planning. That's another one that is used a lot at the high school and post-high level. What you're going to do, you need to have a brief definition of each of these. So I want to know that you at least have an idea of what each of these strategies are. That means a couple of sentences each. Then you're going to do a little bit more research on just one of them. This assignment used to require you to do this research on all three, and it was a pretty big undertaking. That's not what you're doing, but you do need to define what the other two are. So if you pick, once you pick the one that you want to do, you're going to explain that one a little bit more thoroughly. Um, you will need to use, you'll need to get some sources. You need to make sure you're citing all of your sources. Um, you need to outline the steps for implementing the strategy. You'll write 10 to 12 questions that you would ask the family while you're gathering information, and those are um, pretty well part of each of these plans. So you will see some questions. Explain how you'll use the strategy for your students in your class, and then you need to conduct an interview with a family, um, and you will ask them the questions that you wrote in the first step. You will you'll need to post the answers to those questions, and then you're going to also summarize just kind of the information you got and what you learned, reflect on it, and then you're going to create a resource for the family. This is kind of your big assignment for this semester. So um, it's not one, little thing. It's kind of the big assignment. So you'll create a resource that can be used for the family to help the student with a home task. That could go back to using a task analysis. Um, Whatever it is that you feel like based on the interview is something that your family could use. So, um, yeah, it does not have, Rebecca asked if it must be elementary school age. Does not have to be elementary school age. Um, I would prefer that you do it with a student you're currently working with. So if you're currently working with a student, that would be preferable. Um, that means that it may or may not be elementary. If you're not currently working with a student, I don't mind if you use a friend or a family member that has a child who has a moderate to severe disability. Um, but it definitely needs to be MSD. It can't be like a learning disability. It needs to be an MSD disability. If you have trouble finding somebody to interview, let me know. Um, in the past, I've been able to help people find families to interview, um, but preferably it should be somebody that you're currently working with. So um, that assignment also needs to be done in APA. There's a very good website. It's the Purdue OWL website, and it has all the guidelines for doing APA, um, and you need to make sure that you're following those. One other thing, I know that Dr. Rusk has given you a template for, like for a cover sheet. Um, I I understand overlooking it, but for several people, her name is still on that, and it happens every semester. But when you turn this in, you need to make sure that you change the name of the instructor on that. You don't see the chat, Nicole? Is my screen showing? It seems like it should be. Yes, okay. Lindsay says she doesn't see the chat. Okay, she sees it now. All right. So just make sure that you're looking at that. And the reason I say it is not because I'm trying to be vain, but just because that's part of, making sure that you're checking your work and going back and looking at it. So just make sure that you do that. I'm sorry, Nicole. That's okay, Megan. They always want, computers always want to update at the least convenient time. Oh, what I said about the cover page was um, Miss Dr. Rusk has given people a template, and on the template it has her name on it, and it happens more often than you would think that people don't change her name on there, which is, it's fine. But it is part of just, making sure that you're looking over your work and so what I'm saying is you need to make sure that you change those things, the dates, that kind of stuff on them, so that just kind of being cognizant of that kind of stuff and careful not to be um sloppy on that part. I think that it's a template that she gives people in another class that she has with them. Yeah, some people have it and some people don't, but it seems like the people who get it from her forget to take her name off of it. So, um I'm just throwing that out there. Um I know some professors will actually take off points for that. So, just make sure you look at it. I noticed it a couple of times today. The good thing is I love Dr. Rusk and I don't mind being compared to her, so I just take it as a compliment. All right. Any questions? It's because it's her template. It's a template. So, I think people just don't change the name. Like they used it for another class and they forget to go up and change it. I don't think it's my template though. I don't think I have a template. It's on my homepage. Oh, sample paper template. You're right. I forgot about that. Let's see. Maybe I need to change my template. Yep, there it is. We'll we'll take that off. Okay. Yeah, just make sure that you're looking at that kind of stuff. But now I know why it comes up so often. All right. Okay, so any questions for tonight? All right. Um, I'm gonna kind of move down because a lot of this is a repeat or kind of a review. Um, so person-centered planning, that's what we were talking about just a minute ago when I was talking about the assignments. Um, that is what these other um, strategies are the personal personal futures planning, the GIL action planning system, and choosing options and accommodations for children, which is usually referred to as coach. A lot of these do look um, at the student and where we would like them to be and kind of backwards chain. The coach is a little bit different. It's a little bit more of an assessment, but um, those are the three that you're going to use for the assignment coming up. So, so knowing what person-centered planning is, I guess going back up to here, formal plans that map out what a student will accomplish long term, and they guide goals and objectives for transition, CBI, and interventions. How do you think that using person-centered planning lends itself to writing instructional goals for MSD students? So if you're looking at where you would like them to be and creating a plan that way, how are you using that to write instructional plans for students? So when you're looking at your student and you're kind of backward chaining what it is that you would like them to do, you have to break that goal down into very, very basic steps and prerequisite skills. That's where your instructional planning comes from. So if you have a student who has a goal of having an apartment that they're going to live in, either with or without support, you have to think about all of the things that they'll need to know in order to live in an apartment by themselves. They're going to have to know how to pay a bill. They're going to have to know how to um, cook a meal for themselves. They're going to need to know how to clean, how to do their laundry, how to take care of pets if they have them. Those are all things that you would have to use as part of your instruction. So you might start, even if they're in elementary, middle, or high school, thinking about functional skills that you want them to learn so that they can meet a bigger goal. So if they're in elementary school and you know that their goal is to one day live in an apartment on their own, what are some things that you can start working with way back in elementary school to help them prepare for their long-term goal? And just to give a little hint, a lot of you talked about this in your task analysis. You had task analysis for home goals that centered around things, yeah, basic hygiene, just being able to brush their teeth, comb their hair, go to the bathroom, take care of their clothing. All of those things are important. Those are the things that we're already teaching kids at a really young age how to do. And so those are the kinds of things that we can start very young. Setting table, keeping a simple budget, washing dishes. Those are all things that they need to learn how to do. And for our students, there may be some times that we need to be very explicit in our training for them. Um, Good. So Angela says that she has classroom jobs for her students. She has them sweep the floor, wash dishes, do laundry, fold clothes, etc. So those are all things that you can work on in the classroom that will also help them meet long-term goals. So the next question is, what is an adaptive behavior scale? This is something else you may get like from a school psychologist when you're doing your reeval. Has anybody ever done one? No. Okay. So an adaptive behavior, I said, what is an adaptive behavior scale? What it is it is a list of adaptive behaviors, which means life skills or social skills or functional skills. Um, and you will mark what the student can and cannot do. Typically, when you get an adaptive behavior scale from a psychologist, they will tell you that you need to kind of err on the side of no, which seems counter to what we're thinking as teachers. So, for example, it might ask a question like, can the student tie their shoe? And then you may have sometimes, I think it's like never, sometimes always, and always. Sometimes that is how they're written. And if you say sometimes never, because one time um, they tied their shoe, sometimes you can like
That was
bump
the
the
first bit.
score up more than it should be.
Oh, okay.
So they tend to tell you to err on the side of less,
Yeah,
not more.
kill that.
And that can be tough because, as especially as
I
MSD
think
teachers, we really want for our
shut.
students to be
Because Willow has
successful,
experience in
so we
it.
tend to give them
Oh
more
my
credit.
God.
Um, Myself,
That's true.
back in my classroom days, I had
Half of
times
our
when I
team
pulled them
leaves
out,
too
and the
because
psychologist
of
would
this
come back and
MSD.
they'd say, according to this, your student doesn't need to be an MSD. And I'd be like, oh my gosh, yes, definitely she needs to be an MSD, but she had some good adaptive skills. So you do have to look at those things. I'm going to ask the second question first on this. Do all FMD students need to have adaptive behavior goals? The answer is yes. Yes, they do. They have to have some kind of adaptive goal. And the reason for that is because in order to be considered FMD or MSD, we are saying that their disability affects them across all settings of their life. So um, it's not just that it's affecting them educationally or academically, but it is also affecting them um, in other areas. One thing that I would like you guys to think about, even with your higher functioning kids, what is it that is keeping them from being in the general education curriculum with supports? If you have a student and you're saying they don't have any adaptive goals that I need to write, then you need to be asking yourself why they're in your classroom, because that is that is really kind of the key to what makes a student MSD versus LBD. Okay, so some fine motor deficits. Okay, so Rachel says that every one of her students have behaviors that are not on par with their peers. So, so I think somebody said that they have some students that are higher functioning. I think that can be difficult, but you have to think about like what is it that really keeps them from being in an MSD classroom. It could be coping skills. It could be that when they're in a large group that they shut down and they won't work. It could be that they don't, simple things like calling out in class, not knowing, like school norms, that kind of things. But for the most part, if you think about most MSD teachers, they have a variety of adaptive behavior goals that could be written for them. For the most part, with our students, it's kind of where to start. Okay, so Megan says she has one that is learning appropriate behavior, such as raising their hand to speak out. Um, it's kind of interesting, and like just to give an example, um, I know I've told you guys my son is in Cub Scouts, and sometimes for me, I don't know about you guys, but I have one child. He's my only child. And so sometimes like being around students with disabilities all the time, there are some blurred lines there for me of what is appropriate and what is not appropriate for a 10-year-old. Um, we had a flag ceremony on Monday. It was September the 11th, and we did like a flag retirement. And we asked all of the kids in his age group, which were fifth graders, to do part of the flag ceremony. And so their job was to walk up with the flag and put it in the fire because that's how you retire a flag. And then they were supposed to stand and salute. Out of the six, seven kids that were doing that, all of them followed the directions pretty much how they were supposed to, except for one. That was the student or the child in that group that has autism. And he did have a difficult time even looking at his peers and knowing my peers are standing here, they are saluting. I've been told to stand here and salute. As soon as he finished what he was supposed to do, he started kind of like wandering around, um, wanting to get close to the fire, that kind of stuff. And and that's kind of where that deficit lies. A typical student could follow could can follow those directions, but they also can look to their peers to see what they should be doing. And sometimes our students that have autism or have other adaptive behavior issues, they're not looking to their peers for behavioral norms. And those are the kinds of things that even when you see a student who's really high functioning, um, you can see those differences, and those are the things that we need to work on with those kids. So for him, if I were writing a goal, it might be that he would follow behavioral norms, that he would look to his peers to see what he needs to do in a social situation, because that is where he has difficulty. That is where even in a casual setting like Cub Scouts, adults are having to redirect him. He brought in we had them paint rocks. He brought it in wet and set it on the pew of the church. Those are the kind of things where it's like you probably don't have to tell a typical fifth grader, don't put wet paint on a church pew, but he needs to be explicitly taught that. So that's why I think it's really important for us to understand adaptive goals and really look to the peers, um, to see where they should be. Does that make sense? I know that was a very long, um, drawn out example, but I think sometimes because we get immersed in our classrooms, we're not looking at them compared to same age peers. We're looking at them compared to their peers in the MSD classroom. And I am as guilty as the next guy of doing that because it is becomes almost tunnel vision. The good thing though, if you have a child who has autism or has a disability, Cub Scouts is a very good place for them because it is, or Girl Scouts, it's an environment that's a little more casual, but there's also lots of structure and rules, but it's very accepting. So if you personally have kids or if you have students, um, and the parents are looking for things like that for them to do, that's actually a really good place. I will give them a lot of credit for that because I've found it to be very accepting um, of kids with disabilities, especially when their cub master is a special ed teacher. But I digress on that. Ecological inventories, we've kind of already talked about this. You've done this assignment, so this was kind of just a refresher. The difference between an ecological inventory and a task analysis, as you know, is really that an ecological inventory is looking at a student compared to same age peers, where a task analysis is a breakdown of steps. So an ecological inventory, you're comparing those steps, like on your task analysis to where your student should be. All right. Who has ever heard of a preference assessment? All right. So what is it? All right. So Megan says it's when you present a student with objects and let them choose their favorite to build a reward system. Exactly. And the reason I have Woody on here is because that was something that my son loved when he was little. So when I wrote this PowerPoint, that's what I always thought of for preferences. So preferences, okay, I'll ask you guys this instead of telling you. Why are preference assessments so important? Just based on what you've heard just now, why do you think it's important to have a preference assessment? Yeah, so giving students tangible rewards is meaningful to them. Um, it's the way that you motivate students. There are some students that are great. You will find out right away what they like it, how often they want it, no trouble. There are other kids that are a little trickier. So having a preference assessment and looking at what do they like the best, what do they like kind of, and what do they not like at all can really, really be important when you're doing when you're working on um, a reward system or a token board. Um, we were actually having a PLC today for our related arts areas, and we have a pool at our school, which for a lot of kids is like tip top of the preference assessment. They would pick it every time. They don't want to get out. And we were talking about what kind of, when that's your most rewarding thing, how do you find something um, more motivating for that student so that you can get them out because it has to end eventually. It does have to end. So, so you have to find a way, um, to give them to get them out of the pool. And we have a student right now who is having a very difficult time getting out of the pool. And we were talking about trying to do another preference assessment. I will say one thing, and I'm going to go to the next slide just so you can kind of see what it looks like. Megan says, you can also do it with or without replacement of the objects. That is how I was trained by a specialist. And Mind PSI to use the system. We were also told to shuffle the objects to make sure that they weren't always picking it because of the placement, such as a student who has OCD and likes the third object in a row. Correct. Um, this is a very simple preference assessment. This is something that you would do if you just were going to give them two objects. Most of the time, we want to try to give them three, but this is just kind of a simple version of a preference assessment. Megan is absolutely correct. When you're doing a preference assessment, if you can give them more options, that's better. And to make sure that you're not putting the object in the same place every single time. Uh, there's one that's really cool that it like you rotate them through, like you have five objects and you kind of rotate them through. So each one of them has a place and they're given five opportunities to do it. But looking at this preference assessment that I have up here, what do you think is the student's most preferred reinforcer? Yep, it's Skittles. What is their least preferred reinforcer? The ball. Um, yeah, so it would be simple to set something like this up. you're going to know that at the end of this kid probably, it looks like based on this, they're probably more of a fan of sweet because they picked the Skittles and the apple versus the goldfish and the pretzel, but they still would pick the pretzel versus the ball. So they're always going to pick an edible reinforcer, is what it looks like. Not necessarily, but when you give them that one ball, that's probably not it. I would say that um, you want to have a good amount of reinforcers um, for your students, and you want to try to have edibles and non-edibles if you have students that are reinforced by edibles. Um, where do you think you can get information about what to actually put in the preference assessment? You could do an interest inventory, parents. Yep. Really, talking to your parents is a really good place to start because a lot of times there are things that we've never offered them at school. So we don't know how much they like it. So that's a good place to start. Interest inventories, just seeing what your kids go to when they're given free time or kind of free reign on things is a good way to do it. Um, that's what I just said. What kind of items do you pick? What are your thoughts on edible reinforcement? I like to kind of survey you guys on that. Megan says, I have an awesome list of interests that has been found to be a positive reinforcers for children with autism. It came from a facility in the Cincinnati area. If you'd like to send that to me, Megan, I would be happy to post it so that other people could look at it. It had a long list. Okay. Um, so I like a mix of non and then edibles. Work for some, not for others. Can be good and bad. Too much is not a good mixed. So in my experience with edible versus non-edible reinforcement, if you have a student that uh, is highly motivated by food, there's a few things that you have to consider. One, you don't necessarily want to be feeding them all day long because eventually they will satiate. They won't want to eat anymore. And you also sometimes, the guy I was talking about that wants to get in the pool, he's overweight. We try to use edible reinforcement when it's appropriate, but edible reinforcement isn't super appropriate for getting out of a swimming pool because really, you're in water, all of that. I will say though, if edibles are what works, you need to use them. Um, the thing I like about edible reinforcement is it is over. So it is a very quick done. I can give you a Skittle, you will eat it, you will be done, and I'm ready to move on with my work. When you're using computer time or fidgets or even instruments or anything like that, that has to be taken away from them to move on to the next thing. And sometimes that can be difficult because you're having to transition them again from something. With an edible, it can be very quick. I will say, with breaks, with computer, with anything, you can set a timer, and kids do eventually understand the use of a timer so that um, they know that they can do it. Another thing when you're using a token economy, and especially if you're using things that are free, like a break or an instrument or computer time or a YouTube video or anything like that, at the very, 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 very beginning of that, you have to make it super cheap for that student. They have to be able to earn that token for, almost nothing. Um, I have a student that I've been working with, and I'm telling you, he is a changed man. He was spending a good deal of the first part of the school year engaging in self-injurious behavior. Um, he uses a token board. His most preferred reinforcement is actually a break and then like a toy snake. But he also likes hot Cheetos, so that's on there too. But he is a changed man. But the way that we had to do this was he does not transition. As soon as he hears the bell ring or somebody says it's time to move, he starts to hit himself um, in the face, and he has a lot of bruising from it. So it's a behavior we're really trying to extinguish. Um, but it was like, you got out of your chair, you get a token. You got to the door, you get a token. You went down the first hall, you get a token. You got to the second hall, you get a token. He got a token for everything so that he earned his break almost immediately. It had to be like that. You can always fade reinforcement. You can always make your tokens a little more expensive, but at the very beginning, you have to create value. And the only way you can create value is if you can go through the process of getting tokens fairly quickly. When I hear people talking about token boards and having, I can get through 20 minutes before they get to their first token, I think that can be too much for MSD students and way too much at the very beginning. They should really, really be earning them very quickly at the beginning. All right, Megan says, reason why it's hard to explain to other students why they get it or they do not. So you're talking about why some people get reinforcements and some don't. I had my hands tied last year. I was told by my supervisor to use honey buns, and the student ate the outer edge with all the sugar and then moved on to the next reward of sugar-filled juice. Then they wouldn't eat lunch. It would not it was not a healthy cycle, which was an extreme case, but we looked at Little Debbie's store and it was insane. Um, yeah, so Megan, you're absolutely right. When you're using edible reinforcers, you have to think about that. An entire honey bun for one token board is too much, and there are times that will, parents people will say, "Oh no, that's what they earn," and it's too much. And you're right, they're getting too full of sugar. They're getting too full of um too full, and they're not eating. Um, Crystal, that was my token economy. How my token economy began. Quick earning those tokens, then stretched out further. Yeah, and I think that you kind of need to at the beginning. You need to decide where your goal is, um, and then work towards that. So if you're saying, I think they need to be reinforced every 20 minutes, then that means you probably need to be earning a token every 4 or 5 minutes. At the beginning, you're not going to go every 4 or 5 minutes. You're going to go every 30 seconds, but you're kind of getting a goal of, I'm going to stretch it out to this far eventually. Um, all right. So Rebecca, we have it in the same class. We have another student who is extremely OCD, extremely, to the point that he will hurt people because of his OCD. And we are really, really, really working on him with token boards, and he's earning it. But sometimes we're having to give him tokens through the fit. So we're doing hand over hand to get him to do work so that he can earn tokens, so that he can earn the reward because he's not making the connections. And that's probably my guess would be um, that student is probably not making a good the connection between earning the token and getting the reward. Good. So she said that we grew to every period to gain transition goals with notebook as a big prize. It did eventually work. But yeah, so it's really important it's really important to have those systems into place. I can't really say it enough. Um, Kids have to know they're working towards something. Our students are not intrinsically motivated always to learn and to do the things we want to. So we have to place value on it. The other thing that when you're working with preference assessments and you're working with token economies, kids will regress, um, es- especially kids who um, are motivated most by attention. um, and attention's their reward, they're going to regress and they're going to go back to the behaviors that got them the attention they wanted in the first place. Um, in another class, we were talking about another student, and he's a little bit older, and he has done very well with a token economy, and he did get to the point where he needed or he could earn reinforcement every class period, but he regressed back. And we were having to do, we call them room two calls, but basically we were having to do safe crisis management or seclusion with him because he was being um, aggressive to try to get attention. And talking to the teacher, I said, I think you're going to have to move back. I think he's going to have to earn attention more frequently. And she's like, I hate that because he came so far. And, that takes one of my assistants just for him. And I said, but he's demanding that assistant anyway. And sometimes you need to remember that when the kid is having a behavior, they're taking you and your assistant and somebody else sometimes um, anyway. So if that's what they need, if they need attention, sometimes you have to bite the bullet and just um, devote somebody to working with that kid because you can pull the reinforcement back, but they're going to get it. They're going to get that attention and they will up the ante until they get exactly what they want. Um, so moving on, but I am a firm believer, and like I said, the little boy that we were working with, he was having so many behaviors. It was daily. We were having so much trouble getting him off the bus. We were having to carry him off the bus. He is a changed man. He is happier at school. He knows that he has things that he can earn. He knows that those things come with attention if he wants them. And it's like night and day, the difference. And it really has just been a week of him working with a token economy. So it is important, or it is a strategy that will work. Um, Moving on, choice making, and this kind of, comes from also preference assessments. Why is it so important for MSD students to make choices? Right. It gives them ownership. It gives them a sense of self and independence. It gives them self advocacy, which I think is also something that for MSD students can be difficult because, some of our students are nonverbal. Um, they can't even tell you, things that they prefer. Um, so this is teaching choice making is a very important part of what we're doing. Alternate assessment, yes. So they have to make choices. That's the way they're tested. Right, Tina. Everyone likes choices regardless of their ability. Um, Absolutely. You would not like it if you were never given an opportunity to make a choice. Think of all the choices you make all day long. Some of our students aren't getting to make choices for anything. They don't get to choose what they eat. They don't get to choose what they wear. They don't get to choose what they look at. They don't get to choose what kind of entertainment they're receiving. They don't get to choose to come to school or not come to school. They don't get very many choices. So we have to actually teach that so that they have some kind of voice. Exactly, Rachel. They don't have a lot of choice over their lives. Um, I mean, think about it. Some of our students that are G-tube fed, talk about preference assessments. Try to find preferences for students that have very limited physical movement, have very limited um, choices as far as edible or non-edible reinforcement. That's when it can get really, really tough. Sometimes our behavior kids are the easy ones because they like food, they like attention, they like escaping things. So sometimes they can be the easier kids when it comes to finding preferences and making choices. All right. If you have me, you'll probably see this slide like every semester you have me because it's so important. When is communication taught? Yes, all day. Every day, constantly. If you are waiting for your speech therapist to teach communication, you are failing your children. If you are waiting, I'm going to say it again. If you are waiting for your speech therapist to teach communication, you're failing your students. If your students do not have a communication system, it is absolutely your job to work on communication with that student. What is a functional communication system? Or what is functional communication? Correct, Megan. It's communications of needs and wants. And I don't think I have it on a, nope, I don't. I don't have it on a slide down here. Um, there are um, two things that we say for communication that we should be teaching for functional communication. They need to be able to communicate a way to request and a way to protest. Um, those are probably the two skills that if you can give your students two things to communicate what they want and what they don't want, how to request, how to protest. Statistically, it 80% of women with special needs are sexually abused at some point in their life. That's a really, really high number. 80%. Communication is important. Teaching them how to communicate is important. Teaching them to say no is important. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about your students. They need functional communication because it's part of their survival. Why do you think it's important to teach social skills in an MSD classroom? Yeah, absolutely. They're going to have to interact with the outside world. They need to be able to communicate with their peers. They need to be able to participate um, in in general skills in the public, so they can relate to others everywhere. Exactly. Yeah. And Crystal has a very good point. We want them to have a relationship with other people. That's important. Relationships are important. All right. Um, I'm not going to talk about inclusion right now. I'm going to actually move down. So I- I'm just going to kind of wrap this up. You guys can look back at the slides if you want, but I only have a few more minutes. According to IDEA, is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, we should try to include our students in with the general education population as much as we can. We Our goal is always to have our students with disabilities to be taught along non-disabled peers. Um, there is a legal rationale for that, which is that the law states that all children should have access to an education. A philosophical rationale that segregation of individuals on the basis of disability is inappropriate, and educational. It's important to provide instruction to students in the environment that they'll ultimately live. So basically saying that um, if we don't ever expose students with disabilities to students who do not have disabilities, and we never expose students who do not have disabilities to students that do have disabilities, we're not providing a real world setting for our students. And so it's important on both sides for students to understand that this is the environment that we live in. There are people with lots of needs and lots of differences, and um, we have to work with people. We have to. I'm going to skip forward. Okay. So this is the last thing I'm going to talk about, and that is universal design for learning, which is like my favorite thing ever. Um, but what UDL is it is a way to design curriculum to enable all students to participate. Um, sorry. It it is a way to like kind of design your curriculum so that the interventions you put into place for some students can benefit all of your students. And the way that you do that is you provide multiple means of representation. So that means that if you have a book, you might provide a book with picture supports. You might have an audio text. You might have a YouTube video where someone is reading that book. You give them you have multiple ways of representing what you want them to learn. Um, Multiple ways of engaging students, and that kind of goes into um, you might do an activity that will build in some prior knowledge for a student. You might show them a video. You might do some other things that will kind of get them engaged with the material. And then you also give them multiple means of expression. You give them multiple ways of showing what they know. Maybe they can draw a picture. Maybe they'll answer orally. Maybe they'll make a video. Maybe they'll write something. But you're giving them the opportunity to express what they know in multiple ways. And that gives them, going back to choice making, that gives them some choice in how they receive information and how they output information. And that is a really great thing when you're thinking about it from the perspective of students in a like a gen ed setting. If you had students that had comprehension issues, so you provided, fluency issues, so you provided audio text. A student that has comprehension issues may use that audio text and it will help them with the comprehension of that. Um, but allowing everybody in the class to use it means that some students who aren't identified may also get the benefits of some of the interventions that we put into place. So I love UDL. In fact, I'm trying to apply for my um, PhD program right now, and that's probably going to be my dissertation is using UDL for MSD. So hopefully more to come on that eventually, but um, it's really great. If you ever have a chance to do more research into UDL, um, it's a really cool system. Are there any questions before I let you guys go for the evening? All right. If there are no questions, you're free to go. I'll stick around for a couple of minutes if anybody has anything they need to talk about. Thank you, Shauna. Okay, Nicole. Um, I can answer your questions if you'd like. Crystal, I'm gonna try to get to the IEPs in the next week. And I'm gonna try to give you as much feedback as I can on those. Um, so hopefully in the next week or so, I'll be giving you feedback, and I'll always let you redo something if you need to. Correct, Nicole. It does not have to be with an elementary student. Will you need the book? Um, you can probably get the information from other sources, Nicole, but do you have any other teacher in your building that's an MSD teacher by any chance? Oh, you work at Benet? Okay. I guarantee you if you go to um, anybody in your school, they probably have the Wesleyan Fox text. If you want, you guys have you have Shang and Wiggy, don't you? Do you want me to I can give my copy to I think Wiggy will be there tomorrow because it's Thursday. Yeah, I can give it to him and he might be able to bring it to you on Monday. I don't know if that's too late. Yeah, Shang who teaches music. But he won't be here. He won't be at Churchill tomorrow and the next day. Oh, David, Mr. Wigglesworth. I call him Wiggy. If you want it before, we're not, we, we go until he teaches art. Mr. Wigglesworth teaches art. Um, he's got the ponytail. We don't close, or like our school isn't out till 3:45. I know you guys get out a little bit earlier. You could even come by and get it if you wanted to. And you can just send it back with one of them at the end. Yeah, you can come tomorrow. If if you come in, just tell them that you're looking for me and I have a radio so they can call me. Yeah, that's fine. No problem. I'll see you tomorrow. Good night. Okay, Megan, no problem. If you need a couple of more days, that's fine. I understand.